Customary land is land that is not regarded as property under law. So what does that mean? Property is, it's a very specific consideration of land in a very specific context, which is the context that the land is registered under the government's land administration system. Every country in the world has one. We have one as well. It's a model that we inherited from Australia and England, and so we use it here in PNG. And usually, when a piece of land has a government title over it, we can regard it as property. In the normal everyday sense, but also in a legal sense. When we're speaking about customary land specifically, it's land that is not registered under the government's land administration system, and it's land that is owned by the indigenous peoples of Papua New Guinea. The constitution of this country actually recognizes all of them and holds each of those customary land tenure systems as forming part of Papua New Guinea's law, body of laws. And so it's a great gesture, but it also complicates how we deal with customary land, because it's not a one-size-fits-all scenario. Different rules apply for different ethnic groups in the country, and when you're the most ethnically diverse country in the world, it's a very complicated area. Yeah, I think one big misconception landowners have is that once it's registered under the ILG is the final decision maker over that land. And ILG executives and management teams are appointed through elections. It's not hereditary. And I find in my work, I found that a lot of landowners don't understand that. So if it's a patrilineal society, they just assume that, the firstborn son of the firstborn son of the firstborn son is the clan leader. Not exactly. The clan leader, if the clan is registered as an ILG, is the chairperson of the ILG, who is elected through an election process that's set out in the Land Groups Incorporation Act. And that person doesn't have to be the hereditary land group leader. The title that the ILG can hold under the VCLR system is what's called a customary certificate of title. Okay, so it's a freehold title. It's a title of land that's vested, ownership is vested in the ILG itself. That is quite separate from the state lease system, which is a different system of titles that's contained within the same land administration system. It's also then quite separate from another type of certificate of title, which is administered under a different set of laws. It gets very complicated. A lot of it is because of legacy colonial policies and post-colonial policies regarding land. Successive governments in some scenarios haven't completely rolled back some of those legacy policies, or they have, but they haven't rolled back the laws that those policies were empowering. So you have a number of different legal and regulatory schemes in place that gives you different types of land titles. It's not a perfect system, but for the purposes of ILGs and the customary land registration model that's currently being championed by the government, the VCLR process, that's actually what happens. An ILG gets a customary certificate of title Is it perfect? It's been a decade and a half since these innovations were rolled out. One of the biggest difficulties with this system is that the titles are not considered bankable. Any registration of land activity requires getting surveys done, and that requires paying a registered survey privately to carry out the survey work. That's very expensive. Making sure that the officers at the provincial government and the local level government carry out their necessary assessments in terms of land investigations and preparing the necessary land investigation report, ensuring that the Department of Intergovernment Relations, acting with the provincial administrator, are okay with the recommendations, and oftentimes they'll have to endorse one type of certificate or another before it even gets to lands, for the Department of Lands to action it. This takes time and it costs a lot of money from experience. So often the landowners who are able to pursue this right to the end, they need to have some kind of financial backing, and it's in the form often of investors who want to probably take a share in the land, and they're willing to put up capital to get through that process. Yeah, so I think that affordability of participating in this in that system, I think that's the main constraint. What the registration process does is it gives absolute legal recognition to the land that is subject to the title, and more importantly, it assigns a very clear, absolutely legally recognizable owner to that land, and that is the ILG that obviously pursues the registration of the title. What that does firstly is it prevents any funny business from happening where the land is somehow subject to an issuance of a title for which the landowners are not aware of. And so what that forces any third parties who are interested in the land to do is deal with the landowners and look for a way for them to either acquire the title or go into a joint venture with the landowners for the use and benefit of the land. Yeah, and so we've had instances where groups run off and have a meeting, and their meeting is based on the chairman of the meeting being the firstborn son of the firstborn son, when they don't realize that the ILG certificate says that it's somebody else who's the chairperson. And so that's one practical example of how the system can create, I guess, loss of cultural utility. And it's something that more awareness needs to be done on. Often the actual leadership of a clan will avoid being the leadership of the ILG, because taking on those roles requires some level of literacy. And it's often the case that the elder, who is the leader of the clan, isn't prepared to take on that kind of responsibility. So they'll allow someone else to be the ILG chairman, take on the executive roles, without realizing that once you give these people that role, they are technically in charge of the ILG. And so these have caused conflicts. These kinds of situations have caused conflicts among clans. From experience, I've seen a lot of this. Oh yeah, there's a lot of areas where legal challenges arise. I think the main one is that 2 or more ILGs will claim the same piece of land. And it's often the case that they are all related, but because of disputes within and amongst the membership of the clan, there's 2 or 3 different ILGs that are created, and each of them laying claim to the same pieces of land. And that will often end up in litigation at the local land court or even at the national court. I've been involved in a couple of these litigations, and I know of instances where there are disputes where there's 2 or 3 different ILGs and fighting for the same piece of land, fighting for the right to register the same piece of land, and they've been at it for decades. Like they're stuck in the court system. The people who initiated the cases have actually passed away. Like, yeah, those are some of the scenarios we've seen happening. Another area of contention is ILGs being set up, but then the management or executives of the ILG become rogue, more or less, where they stop reporting to their clan membership on what's going on, and that's a misapprehension of the functions of a management committee. A management committee of the executives are not supposed to be the dictatorial decision makers of the ILG. They're supposed to take everything back to the membership for approval. So any major decision has to go through a full general meeting of the membership. And what we found is that once ILGs are set up, sometimes management teams operate in isolation from the rest of the membership. And that can lead to outcomes where the management goes ahead and makes commitments on behalf of the clan to developers, to third parties looking for land, settlers, to the government, without the knowledge of the membership. And then they're shocked. The membership is shocked to find that gardening lands are now being occupied by non-members of the clan. And when they inquire, they're shocked to find that the management has signed an agreement giving somebody else a right to use the land. So these are the kinds of scenarios that cause conflicts in this system. There's many others, but I think those 2 are the main ones. Yeah. The kind of reform we need to see is the reform in the standards that are used or to implement the law and policy. So it's a training and human resource reform, not so much a legal reform, because a lot of the bottlenecks in the system are caused by either folks who aren't properly trained to understand their responsibilities and carry out those responsibilities diligently, or it's done by people who know what their responsibilities are but choose to ignore and commit dereliction of duty, which results in unnecessary bottlenecks in the, I guess, the most innocent cases, and in the worst cases, corruption. And so the laws are no legal system, no set of laws is going to fix all the problems overnight when the people tasked with implementing the laws cannot implement up to a certain standard that's required of them by the laws. It's an area of law that even most lawyers don't understand. It's an area of policy that even most policymakers don't understand. Yeah, so that, and there's a lot of dangers there because especially with the process of turning customary land into state land, it's an almost irreversible process when it happens. It's one that often is the next step after customary land registration. Because you have scenarios where a developer will come in and finance the effort to get a customary certificate of title under the VCLR system, but then they find out that that title is actually not bankable. So they now have to go through the process of converting that certificate of title into a state lease. And that conversion process requires another process called alienation, where customary land is turned into state land. And once it's turned into state land, you actually have to give the land over to the state. And the state gives you back a 99-year lease to occupy the land, or to make use of the land. And often, I would say that that process is irreversible. And it's a process that customary landowners need to make sure that they get the best deals. It's in my practice, it's something I try to help landowners get when we do sit down and talk with the state over the alienation of their lands. But I've seen a lot of horror stories where customary landowners don't get the best deals. And it comes down to what they're able to negotiate as a negotiating table with the state and the developer. Do I disagree with that model? Not necessarily. Again, in order for developers to develop the land needs to be a state lease so that banks can provide financing. That's the principle on which this entire city was built. All the cities in the world were built, and if Papua New Guinea wants to go through a phase of development that is, that is something that I think everybody aspires for today. Those are some of the sacrifices we'll have to make. Our landowners will have to make, and so you ask why the city of Port Moresby is built here on Motuan land. It's because the Motuans made that sacrifice. They gave up all their land. All that land was turned into state land. Banks could then finance every single building that's in the city to be constructed. If we're going to develop and modernize the rest of Papua New Guinea, landowners in our 21 other provinces must get ready to have those conversations as well with developers and the state. Right, so I think for anybody who wants to register their customary land, they've got to sit down first and be clear with what they want. If what they want is a management system for land that should remain customary land and nothing else, and that no member of their clan requires going to the bank to get a loan to build their house, then they should look at the VCLR system, because that system is designed for clans to take ownership of their land and issue smaller allotments to their clan members. If a landowner is looking to register their land and not necessarily under their clan, and their intentions are mostly to protect the land that they have, maybe they've built a house on it, maybe they don't want the land to be in dispute when they pass away, they want a clear ownership to be there and it can be passed on to their children and not revert back to the clan, then the certificate of title model under the PNG Lands Commission conversion process, that is the one I'd recommend. Now, if any of your dealings require getting an investor involved going to the bank for financing, it's got to be state lease. You got to look at the state lease model. Now, the amendments that happened a few months ago, or a few weeks ago rather, they provide for an expedited manner to achieve the state lease model. But that model requires the conversion and alienation of customary land into state land, and you do it by going into an agreement with the state, and maybe a developer also comes in and joins in that agreement. It's an agreement where you give your customary land to the state permanently, and the state gives it back to you as a 99-year state lease, and then you can then enter into a joint venture with a developer, or you can develop it on your own. But once you have that state lease, banks will be prepared to have a listen or have a read of your loan application or your mortgage application, financing application, because they would then be able to secure their lending through a mortgage that's registered on that title. And that's currently a system that is only achievable practically through state leases and not through the other two models: the customary certificate of title under the VCLR process and the certificate of title process under the Lands Commission conversion process. Mind you, the Lands Commission conversion process is not even under the Department of Lands, it's under the Department of Justice. And so, as I was saying, different processes, a number of legacy processes that we're still allowing to subsist, and it causes a lot of confusion among people in the country. But if having studied all three systems carefully, having worked inside all three systems carefully, that's what I can say. If you're a landowner or an occupant of a customary land, and you want to just register a land in your name and maybe pass it down to your next of kin, the Department of Justice PNG Lands Commission conversion process, which creates a certificate of title at the end, that's probably the best process to look at. If you're a clan trying to register a land under your clan, then the ILG and VCLR process is the one you need to look at, and that's under the Department of Lands Customary Lands Division and Land Groups Division. These are the two divisions that roll out that process. There's two steps in that process: creating the ILG, which is the holding entity for the title, and then going through the VCLR process itself to get the customary certificate of title. And that third process is the state lease process.